Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 336, and today's guest is Julia Rodgers, CEO and co-founder of HelloPrenup, a platform that takes the awkwardness out of discussing and creating prenuptial agreements. This is the third and final podcast interview from my live sessions at Suffolk University, where I interviewed three successful alums, that being Don Bulens, Ernesto DiGiambattista, and Julia. Some of the best entrepreneurs that I've interviewed for this podcast have either bootstrapped or raised a very, very minimal amount of capital to build their company in the early years. If you're successful with this approach, there are many benefits, including the fact that you will have likely built a solid foundation for your business, and if you do decide to raise capital to help fuel the growth, you'll have a lot more control over the terms. As you'll hear from this interview, Julia has only raised $150,000. She started working on HelloPrenup while working a full-time job. This would involve working on the side with the developer on the initial build of the product while also writing 1,200-word blog posts daily about prenups. This is a true foundational story of entrepreneurship and why I absolutely love doing this podcast. In this episode, we cover lots of great topics, like Julia's background story and her experience as an attorney in family law, the industry trend that prompted her to start a business around prenups, a topic that has a history of being taboo between couples, all the details about HelloPrenup, including how she met her co-founder, Sarah Beth Jaffe, a deep dive into their appearance on ABC Shark Tank and their successful investment from Kevin O'Leary and Nirav Tulia, the founder of Nextdoor, why she hasn't raised institutional venture capital funding to date, how she has approached hiring for the team and found people who are passionate about their business, advice for female founders and the power of networking, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. This week's episode is sponsored by MarketMuse, a content intelligence platform that sets the standard for content quality. Their AI-powered software enables companies to create predictably better content at scale that increases traffic and engagement, improves productivity, and drives revenue. Get more out of your content with packages starting at $0 a month. That's free. Plus, you can get 20% off the MarketMuse standard plan by using our code FIZZ20, that's FIZZ20, at checkout. Go to marketmuse.com to get started. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Julia. Now we have Julia Rodgers from HelloPrenup.
That's me.
And we got so much to talk about because we did a pre-interview and I learned so much about what you've done. Again, a Suffolk alum. But I'm Keith Klein. I'm the founder of VentureFizz. I am not a Suffolk alum. I wish I was. But VentureFizz is a website that if you're looking to dial into the Boston tech scene, there's lots of information about companies, and it's also like it's a hiring website too. So we produce a lot of content that helps tell the story of companies, their people, their culture. So whenever the job search happens, if you're not already building a company, it's a resource that will help hopefully guide you down that path. But we have a podcast that we've been publishing for 5 or 6 years now, and I interview founders and investors, mainly in Boston and New York. So any of your entrepreneurial pursuits, if you're looking for advice on building a company, raising capital, I mean, there's a whole myriad of topics that we cover. They're all inspirational because we talk about the person's background story, company building, and then some general advice. So there's over 300 episodes that you can check out. But I'm really excited because Julia is doing some amazing things, and how you've built your company, I think, is really important. So to kick things off, I did want to talk about building companies, what I consider the fundamental right way. Yeah. There was a whole period of time recently where it was like raise capital, grow at all costs, customer acquisition, doesn't matter how much you spend, you just grow, 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 grow. And I think there was a missing component of business fundamentals during that stretch. So, what are your thoughts as it relates to company building and that mantra of growing at all costs?
Sure. Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. I think that traditionally or historically, maybe entrepreneurs have looked at success as being something you can measure by how much capital you've raised. So, there's this whole kind of ethos. I've raised 15 million. Oh my God, that company has raised 30 million. But really, it doesn't make any sense to me, because just because you've raised capital does not mean you have a product market fit. It doesn't mean that it's a sticky product. It doesn't mean that you're going to be profitable in the next couple of years, right? And so I think that, my own story is one of, I've barely raised any capital. People always say, how much have you raised? 30 million? I barely any money. I think I've raised in total $150,000.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
thank you. And that's very intentional, right? We still have the option of going to raise money. But the reason I haven't, and I'll tell you a story of, back in the beginning when I first started this company, I thought the first thing you needed to do was raise capital. I don't come from a world where that's normal. I don't know anybody else who's a founder at this point. What is this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? I didn't come from a family that were very business oriented. Everybody was a lawyer, very traditional attorney. And so I went to a pitch competition and I pitched HelloPrenup. And it was $50,000 for 30% of the company, which sounds absolutely insane now when you think about it. But I thought, wow, I need the $50,000. I got to build this. That's the only way I know how to do it. I didn't have any of my own money, right? So I made it to the second round of this pitch competition. They were choosing between me and one other company. And they said, I just don't see how this is going to scale. I don't think enough people need prenups. And I didn't really have the data to back me up because at that point, prenups were kind of, there just wasn't much out there. And so I was really upset. I didn't get the $50,000. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this myself. I hired a development firm out of India. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning every single morning to work with them to build the MVP.
While you're working. I mean, we're going to get
While
into
I'm working.
We're going to get into the weeds of how you got there.
Yeah, and the reason I think that's so important, though, to your point of like scrappy startups, is you have to be creative. Like being forced to do a lot with nothing made me think outside the box. And I think that is why, at the end of the day, we're successful today, because I didn't have a choice. I had to figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Am I diving too deep?
No, well, no, but great lessons learned, because today at Suffolk we talked about a CEO who was venture each iteration of his journey, which is a different trajectory. There's nothing wrong with that. And then we talked to Ernesto, who did raise, but is now on the investor side, and we talked about don't raise if you don't like it doesn't anoint your company to be successful if you raise, right?
Yeah.
There's so many pieces that come with raising venture capital funding. Yet it's in the media. It's glamorized. It's there's movies about founders now, which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's also a good thing because it promotes entrepreneurship. But
and it sounds cool.
It does.
Right? Oh, you raised $30 million. That's so cool.
What was your valuation? No, at what terms? All right. So let's rewind the clock. So, where did you grow up, and talk about your beginnings. Suffolk, kind of the foundational years.
Yeah. So I grew up in Rentham. Anybody been to the outlets lately? And small town. My family, like I said, all attorneys, right? Nobody was really in business. I went to Suffolk Law, which I'm really proud of. And it was at Suffolk Law that I feel like I really started to get a handle on how to innovate in law. I always had that idea. And it was in Gabe Tenenbaum's class, Lawyers and Smart Machines, where he showed us, this is how you can automate legal documents. And that's kind of where a light bulb went off. I was always interested in business. I always had, I think, a inclination towards business. I knew I wanted to innovate in law. I just didn't know how. And Suffolk is kind of what taught me this is the how you can do it.
Got it. Okay. So how did you get your career started then?
So obviously, I was an attorney. I worked through law school. I figured out, as I was working through law school, I worked at a big law firm, very corporate, representing, the Bank of Americas of the world. And I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy representing a corporation. I really wanted to work with people. I really felt that there had to be a way to educate the everyday consumer on things that maybe felt uncomfortable for them. And that's when I started working in family law. So after going into family law, a very small practice, I helped build it to, a couple of attorneys. We were one of the top three in the state. And that's where I was really allowed by the firm to build out. I was allowed to test things. And that's like my number one piece of advice for entrepreneurs. If you have any interest in being a founder, find someone who is in your area that you're interested in, who's willing to let you test, let you try things. How can you innovate here? How can you throw ideas around that will be well received or that you can try out and just have some fun with it, because that's how you learn is doing. And I was very lucky that the firm at the time allowed me to do that.
What were some of the things that you tested that were like either successful or failure, fail, whatever?
Yeah. Well, for example, when I started at the firm, typical law firm, they didn't accept credit cards. And I was like, the realization rate, meaning the number of clients, the rate at which clients actually pay their bills because they had to pay by check, was so low. Well, of course, people don't want to pay their bills by check, and especially not to their lawyer. That's like the last thing on their list. So how can we make this process faster? Okay, so we came up with this accounting system that allowed them to pay by link and by credit card. And then, they didn't want to fill out they had all these paper forms. When you became a client of the law firm, you had to fill out this stack of like 15 pages. And I said, well, what if we just automated those? There have to be form stack builders. And there is one, actually. I think it's called Form Stack. And so we started using that. And that was an idea that kind of came from being at Suffolk and learning about these legal automation tools. And so by integrating those into the firm, I was able to measure what was working. Okay, this is what clients want out of a law firm. This is what clients want out of law when they hire someone. And that was really successful.
Yeah.
So then, you get one thing right and you're willing to be a little bit more daring in your next couple of tests.
And this was family law.
Yes, right. Divorce law.
Yeah, which is like, so, it's complicated.
It is complicated. And this is where the education piece comes in. I would talk to so many potential clients getting married who wanted a prenup but really didn't want to talk to a divorce lawyer. They felt really uncomfortable. And I thought, how can I educate them? My theory has always been, especially in the consumer space, and this is really specific to the consumer space, if you can educate people for free on something or demystify a topic that is taboo, you're creating incredible value, and you can sell them whatever you want. And so for me, it just was a natural progression. Create information, create value with information on prenups that is free, and then you'll be able to sell them prenups.
Okay, so you haven't raised capital, but a lot of VCs would say, why is this entrepreneur uniquely qualified to solve this problem and have passion and conviction to go after this market? Like, you obviously check the boxes there, right? So you're working in family law. You saw this problem firsthand. But like you said, taboo, right? Like, if I bring up prenup, is the other person going to say, what are we going to get divorced? Like, so what trends were you seeing of discussions of, maybe a new generation that this is just part of the equation?
Yeah, I saw a lot of millennials getting married who felt like either their parents were making them get a prenup. I knew that the great wealth transfer was happening, and that's coming from boomers passing on wealth to their millennial kids. And I saw a lot of millennials that were getting married later, right? They're kids of divorce. And they're interested in protecting their property, their premarital property, because they're getting married in their 30s, or they're interested in protecting their soon-to-be spouse from their debt. Most people have school debt. And that's where a prenup came in. They felt very uncomfortable, like I said, with the idea of hiring a traditional attorney. And that's where the idea for HelloPrenup came from. But I do think, well, I forgot your question.
Well, it's just ultimately, how did this taboo topic become
So mainstream.
Yeah, just more of the norm.
Yeah, I think prenups have been accelerating. Like at the time when I created HelloPrenup, I didn't have the data to show me that this was happening, but I knew it because I was talking to people. I was in the field. And I feel like that's one of the things entrepreneurs need to pay attention to is
Right.
if you have direct industry experience, even though you may not have data to back up your inclinations, you will see it coming
Right.
because you're there every day in and day out, talking to people.
Yeah. And that's where I think the best entrepreneurs are in the weeds, seeing the problem that needs to be solved over and over and over again versus sitting around a conference room being like, we need a business idea. What needs to be
Yeah.
disrupted?
Yeah.
AI, right? We need to do something like, no, it needs to be organic.
Yeah.
It needs to be authentic, and it needs to be a problem that you are passionate to solve because of the grind,
Yes.
right? It's not
Yes.
just waking up and everything just comes
Yes.
together. There's the hustle.
Well, that's the thing, and I always get the question like, did you always know you wanted to start a business? And I think, did I have an inclination towards business? Yes. I thought it was interesting and I liked it. But it wasn't so much of, I'm going to start a business no matter what. It
Right.
was like, when is the right idea that I have direct experience in that I really feel like I can make a difference going to come along? And for me, that made the most sense versus just trying to start a business, starting something random. The first question any VC asks you is like, what is the TAM? And I think if that's all you're going for is money, you will probably fail.
Right. Yeah. And it's real world experience. So we were talking about Pat Kinsell,
Yeah.
right? So your company has a partnership with his company.
Yes.
It was notarized. Now it's
Proof.
Proof.
Yeah.
But he was a guest on the podcast, and his company was acquired by Twitter. He was going in. He had to get his shares notarized, like paperwork that was notarized for his exit of his company to Twitter. And he goes to the notary, and they did it wrong, and he had no idea. And he stood in line at the whatever the place is for notarizing. Titles, tags, whatever those places, and he's just like, okay. And then the person did it wrong, and this could have cost him an unbelievable amount of money.
Yeah.
So that's what was him like, this shouldn't be done this way. There's a
Yeah.
better way of notarizing documents that are important. It's legal, and it's authorizing that this is the person they say they are. So there's an important use for that notarization,
Yeah.
yet the process was still this place where you get your title, tags, and anyways.
Yeah.
He's now built a big company. So that's just another good example of
Yeah.
a real world experience.
Yeah. It's a great company. We're really proud of our partnership with them.
So you started talking earlier about how you got started,
Yeah.
where you had this idea, okay, I'm not a tech person.
Yeah.
So how did you find an offshore development firm, and what was that process like?
Yes. So Upwork just put out a nice little ad looking for a developer. Had no idea what that meant. I just thought, why don't I start somewhere? And I interviewed a couple of them. This group seemed great. I mean, there was really no reason other than cost that I used them. And I worked with them. I would draw out what I wanted the website to look like on a piece of paper. And then I would send it to them by email. And this is kind of how we went back and forth day in and day out. And I mean, we would meet every morning at 4 a.m. before work. And just see kind of where they were and iterate on the process. And this went on for probably like a year until I had an MVP.
And what was that like? Like, did it all work out as far as working with that team?
Kind of. I mean, they produced a product. It did work, but it would break all the time. And I was so frustrated by that because although the development in and of itself was inexpensive, I would say, comparatively, it was still my money. It was still expensive. I hadn't raised capital. So I was really feeling the burn. And when it would break, I would then have to go find another developer. And it was, this process of, I look back now and I say, wow, that was the best thing that happened to me because I learned so much in such a short span of time. I learned how to communicate with people who maybe didn't understand the US legal system. I learned how to communicate with developers. I learned how specific you need to be about certain components and how they need to work. I mean, it really was, creating a wireframe from scratch.
Right. But I talked to one of the Suffolk students today that has an idea, yet not a technical person. And he was asking me, like, how do I find a technical? So knowing what you know now, how would you have built out that MVP? Like, would you have done something? You learned a lot, but how would you do it differently for someone that's figuring that out themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things to happen was when my technical co-founder, Sarah Beth, reached out to me. And I always say, as a founder, you know if you have the right co-founder, if they're willing to work with you for free. And so when Sarah Beth approached me, and this is a roundabout answer for you, but when Sarah Beth approached me, she had just gotten engaged. She was a software engineer out of Seattle, and she just cold emailed me and said, "Hey, I found HelloPrenup. I really like it. Do you want to talk?" And I said, "Absolutely. This is like the best timing ever. Yes, let's talk. Because the website was down actually at that point. And we knew immediately when I first got on Zoom with her, I just knew this girl is excited about this idea because she has a real need for it personally. And she said, you know what? We're going to do this. We're going to do this. I'm going to work for free. Like, I can't pay you anyway, right? So the company at that point wasn't making any money. And so we partnered, and it just felt like a really natural fit. And I think so my advice to entrepreneurs would be, if you're not a technical person, find your other half that is. Make sure that they're just as invested in the mission as you are, and not just the concept of being a founder, because I think that's really sexy to some people without any substance behind it. So make sure they're really invested, and then you can accomplish anything together.
Well, you knew something else, how did you know that content was going to be a key piece to your strategy? Because obviously Sarah Beth had to find you somehow. She must have been Googling prenups to somehow find HelloPrenup. So how did you know the content marketing piece was going to be a key element of your acquisition?
Yeah, well, I didn't have a choice. First of all, I couldn't afford Google Ads. I didn't really know how affiliate partnerships worked. It was just me. So the only thing I could think of is SEO. SEO is free if done right. And Google, or search engines rather, reward really good content. So what I would do is just write basically what is the equivalent of a term paper, like 1,200 words a day on prenups, on various different topics for various different states, and publish those from the WordPress site. And so by the time Sarah Beth was Googling, I guess my SEO efforts were working because she found us.
But how did you know, like, SEO is like, it's a science too? It's not just like...
It is a science,
yeah. Like keyword structure and things like that. So did you learn on that, or were you just, I'm going to create great content and Google's going to reward me?
Free tools.
Yeah.
So like free tools like SEMrush. I think there was another one back like 6 years ago that I was using. But just figuring out what people, I think even Google has one now. But figuring out what people are Googling, what do they want to know about? And then keywords that are ancillary to that. So, if you run out of topics to write about prenups, then, you write about weddings or topics that are more top of the funnel. Relationships and money, women and money is a really big topic and one that I'm very passionate about. So it was just using tools that are out there in the marketplace and doing a little bit of research. But most of this is free, right? You don't have to have a lot of money to do this stuff. You just have to have the will and the discipline to do it every single day. And I think that is the hardest part.
Definitely. And yeah, so I don't know if Google still calls it this, but it used to be Google like Webmaster Tools, where you have a Google account and you can go into the back end and you can type in keywords and you'll see the popularity of that keyword to know, is that something that I want to compete for? And when I say compete, like the word prenup, I'm sure was highly competitive. Lots of people typing that in,
Yeah.
but a lot of people already writing, or if you were trying to do, the ad spend, it would probably be ridiculous.
Crazy.
Crazy.
And now it's even crazier.
I bet. I
Yeah.
bet. So were you doing more like the long tail keyword approach of finding?
Yeah. Yeah. I started out doing longer tail phrases and then zeroing in on particular locations. So, being in Massachusetts, and HelloPrenup, by the way, is state specific, right? So I wasn't in 32 states initially. I was in Massachusetts and New York. So writing state specific articles, which in turn obviously helped me develop those states because I had to understand the law. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think you have to think outside the box a little bit when you're in a position where you don't have a lot of capital, and the capital you do have, you have to be as efficient as possible with. So
So if you're engaging with an attorney, like what's the cost to do a prenup, like to do it through a legal, like an attorney?
an attorney,
Yeah.
yeah, like probably 2,500 to 5,000
Right,
per
okay.
person, which is probably like between, I mean, we just did our own study. I think it's actually higher than that. I think it's around 4,500. So your prenup could range from $5,000 to $10,000. It depends on where you are in the country, but Hello Prenup is $599 per couple. So pricing strategy is important.
Right. Okay. So how did you start to get traction? Was it just through SEO, like proper hygiene there?
Yeah, yeah. SEO was really important, obviously. And then Shark Tank. I mean, Shark Tank was a really big deal for us.
Okay. All right. So I do want to like that. So
Yeah,
I wanted to make sure I was at the right point of, okay, do we
yeah,
introduce Shark Tank? So your co-founder that you
yeah.
talked about, your CTO,
Sarah Beth, yeah.
Sarah Beth, she reaches out to you out of the blue, which is
Yeah,
like, wow, this is amazing, right?
yeah,
So all of a sudden you get another phone call.
yeah. Yeah, so Sarah Beth and I started talking like sometime in March. I think it was mid-March. And only a few weeks later, I get an email from a producer at Shark Tank. And I'm like, someone's
Spam.
punking
Totally
me. Like, this
spam.
is so mean. April 1st is, April Fool's Day is around the corner. It's too
Right.
soon. And they said, we're looking for pandemic businesses. Would you be interested in auditioning? And I immediately called or texted Sarah Beth and was like, "Can you believe this? Like, should we do this?" And we were both huge Shark Tank fans, and immediately, yes. So we started the auditioning process only a couple weeks after we partnered.
Okay, so the audition process is over Zoom or something? Like how did
Yeah,
you do that?
they do it in person now, but
Yeah,
it was over
at the
Zoom
time,
at
yeah.
the time, and there were, multiple. I mean, it's like a part-time job, the amount of paperwork you have to fill out and the amount of videos you have to make and ideas you have to pitch and
Right, because there's like a pre-roll video of what you
yeah.
do and
Yeah, and they want to get a feel for your personality and how you are on camera, and they're all about the high energy. So
okay, so you get selected and you do all these things. Okay, now you go out to California to do the taping and
yeah, we filmed late July. So again, we partnered in March. We filmed late July. The business was really new because remember, even though I existed before Sarah Beth and I met, my website was down when she contacted me. So we had to completely rebuild it. And once we thought we were going to be on Shark Tank, we were like, oh my God, we're going to go on national television. And this
this
site
is gonna get
has to get completely redone.
scale.
So yeah, so she's working really hard. I'm working really hard. We're trying to just get this thing up and running. And I think we had only relaunched the site like less than a month before we filmed Shark Tank. So by the time we went on Shark Tank, we were really freaking out. We had no sales. I mean, we hadn't even met yet. We'd never met in person.
Right, she's in Washington State.
She's in Seattle.
Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, we hadn't met in person. So it was kind of a shock to the system, but we're entrepreneurs, so we got to roll with it.
Gotta roll. So you finally meet her like the day before you're gonna go on TV,
Yeah.
and you had been rehearsing
Over
Over
Zoom.
Zoom.
Yeah, our coordinated pitch over Zoom.
Okay. So you have the background story of this now, and if you watch, just go on YouTube, you'll see the segment. You guys were like you'd been working together for years. Like you played off of each other exceptionally well.
Thank you. That means a lot, and I think it says a lot about the synergy in our partnership and working relationship.
Okay, so the other thing that you may or may not know about Shark Tank, it's a 15-minute, 10-minute clip that they show.
8 minutes.
8 minutes. Okay, So the actual segment that you're standing in front of the sharks is how long?
About 90 minutes.
An hour and a half.
Not everybody. It's usually like between 45 and 90 minutes. But we were closer to 90 minutes.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. And the sharks are just question after question.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like 10 minutes when you're in front of them. It feels really fast. But yeah, it was 90 minutes.
Okay. Well, if you watch the segment, there's a moment where Robert, one of the sharks, just says something where I was like, oh, because I think you talked about your revenue and then your plan for SEO, and he was just like, oh, come on. And he was just like throwing his hands up. No way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Kevin did that too, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
I did talk a lot about SEO.
Yep.
Mark Cuban was wonderful. He was so nice. I think Kevin was out at one point. He did not believe my SEO projections that we would be number one in 60 days. I think it took us like 120 days to become number one, but I still consider that a win.
That's a win, yeah.
And then Robert threw me a couple curveballs that, I don't think I saw coming. I just, I don't know. I was really surprised. And one of them was about the idea that people who wanted a prenup would ultimately go to an attorney. And Lori actually defended us and stood up and said, no, Robert, I don't think you get it. This is how people are going to get prenups. And I was so grateful to her because it was kind of fun. It was very lively. And she definitely stood up for us.
And there was a guest shark in the room that ended up being key too. So
Nirav Tolia is the founder of Nextdoor and one of our investors and advisors.
And he was the first one to say, I'm in. And I get this. Because, I mean, his business is built around doing things differently and content. And,
he understands SaaS.
Right.
And he got it right away, and he asked all the right questions. Mm-hmm. And he's been a wonderful partner. We really enjoy working with him, and he's very hands-on. He's just such a super smart guy. We're so grateful to work with him, truly.
And you were able to get two sharks. So Kevin O'Leary.
We got Kevin back in.
Right, because he has a whole portfolio that's focused on weddings.
He loves talking about women and money and finances and empowerment through finances. So he was also a really great fit. Truth be told, when we went into the tank, I wanted to get Kevin. Because I knew he was a Boston guy. Yeah. I was like, Kevin would be a perfect fit. So when he went out, Sarah Beth and I said, we need to get him back in if we can, and it worked.
Got it. And he had invested in Love Pop, which is another local company that went through Shark Tank.
Yes. Love Pop's great.
Yeah. So talk about that experience. So then you do this national ABC program, and it airs. What was that like?
It was kind of crazy because it's crazy to see yourself on TV. If you've never been on TV, it's a strange experience. And Shark Tank doesn't show you anything in advance. You have no idea what you're going to sound like, what you're going to look like. You barely remember the experience because you're so in the moment when you're there. And once it aired, your immediate thought is, oh my God, we're going to sell so many prenups that night. We sold no prenups. Absolutely no prenups that night. And we thought, oh God, what does this mean? And we're the very first legal tech company ever on Shark Tank.
Okay.
So we had no benchmark. We're not selling $10 widgets, right? We're selling a $600, which is pretty substantial, SaaS product, legal product. But what we did see was it was really valuable for our SEO.
Right.
It was really valuable for name recognition. It was really valuable for content. And so we've really leveraged that as much as possible, along with our relationships with the sharks.
All right. So how did the business start to see, the growth of people, paying for prenups?
Yeah, well, we continue to grow. So one of the things I said on Shark Tank was like, we'll be number one on Google, and that's the most important thing for us because it allows us to keep our customer acquisition cost way down,
Right.
which is really important in SaaS. And it allows us to scale to different states if we can do that. And it has worked really well because we've been, doubling year over year our revenue. And our traffic is just through the roof, right? So we continually build on what we have. And we've also been able to, we have affiliate partnerships. Some are with Kevin's companies. So we've tried to kind of like leverage all of these different pieces that came from Shark Tank.
And how did you decide to, add other components to the site where you can have on-demand legal advice?
Yeah, well, that's something I always wanted to do. As an attorney and someone who realizes that, technology only goes so far, right? Technology can't give you legal advice. Even, with the invention of AI, there's a question as to how far AI can really go, how accurate the information was. And so I always wanted to, and I always thought it would make the most sense to add attorney services. But one of the things that we have paid attention to more and more over the years is data. So we started collecting data, immediately when we relaunched this company. And we've analyzed it continuously and still do so. And one of the things that we saw was that our customers wanted legal advice. And so we just follow the trail, right? If we see the data that says, 60% of customers want to hire an attorney, they have to do so outside the platform, let's integrate it in. X percentage want to notarize their document, or need to notarize their document but want to do it online and can't through the platform, we partner with Proof.
Right.
So data has been a really important component to our success.
Got it. Okay. What's the team look like now?
We have about 12, I think now 13 employees, and growing. We're all over the country. I'm actually the only one on the East Coast, so the only one in Massachusetts. And we're in California, and yeah, we have some employees all over the world, actually.
Now, we touched upon this at the beginning. I would imagine you have been approached by VCs. Like,
Yeah.
why not raise that round and, blow it out with advertising and whatever could come with having that money in the bank?
Yeah, I think it's a mindset thing for me. Why would I want to give away more of my equity so I can have a third party come in and tell me how to run my company? I think we as a team have such a good handle on who we are as a company, what we stand for, and how to acquire a customer, and what our customers want, that I just don't see the value right now of having a third party intervene. I do see a world in the future, and we reevaluate this every 6 months. I mean, we sit down and we have a leadership team meeting where we talk about, is this something that we want to do? Do we want to raise capital in the near future? I do see a time in which we may want to do that, and we're still open to it. But
Yeah.
right now, I feel like we're in such a good spot. I mean, how can you argue with doubling year over year?
But that's the spot you want to be in.
Yeah.
So you're dictating the terms. If you do raise capital, it's because it's a necessary component to accelerate growth of a business.
Exactly.
Not to support the lifeblood of salaries and operations for a
Exactly.
business.
And I think that's another really important point for entrepreneurs to understand is a lot of companies that go out and they immediately raise capital just because they have this idea and it may be a wonderful idea, but they're raising capital to try and throw money at the problem to figure out how to acquire a customer. In an ideal world, you'll start a company, and if you're scrappy, you will understand the market so well that you'll know where your customer is because you will have done your due diligence before you get to that point.
Right.
And to me, that is the most sustainable way to build.
Got it. Random question, but maybe you might be aware. Anybody ever heard of a company called Klaviyo here in Boston? No? It's a SaaS company that is email marketing. It's SMS marketing. The reason why I'm mentioning the company is because the company went public last year, but the founders bootstrapped the company for years
Yeah.
before they raised capital. And when they raised it, it was for a strategic purpose, not for the lifeblood of the company.
Yeah.
And if you look at the S1 document of how much the founders still owned when they went public, it was a great decision. It's just they still own, the majority of the company. So
It's incredible.
the longer, like if venture is your route, which it can be, and it's a beautiful thing, the longer you can hold out before you raise, the more, you're going to be able to dictate the terms. And I'm sure when you decide, if you decide, it'll be very competitive and, so.
Yeah. And choose your partners wisely. That's always my best piece of advice. Going into Shark Tank, you don't really know what you're walking into, but I think we did a really good job after the episode of doing our due diligence on the sharks as people and potential partners in this company instead of just taking them at face value as sharks. And because we did that, I truly believe we have the best possible partners. We also partnered with Brian Liu, who's the founder of LegalZoom,
Which is amazing.
and we're very proud of. And I feel like we're at such a good spot because we did our due diligence. I hate hearing founder stories where, they end up in these positions where there's an imbalance in control due to the terms of the investment, and I think that can really hinder success.
So, what advice, like, when do you reach out to the sharks or, your investors? Like, how often do you communicate? What are they providing you as far as mentorship or advice?
Yeah, they're there when we need them. And same with Brian Liu. So, Kevin will call me and ask me how it's going, and I'm, happy to talk to him. He just had a get together in Miami for all of his companies, his Shark Tank companies, and that was really fun because in real time we get to update him on what's going on. He's always got really great ideas and really great connections. And then Nirav, same. We meet with Nirav on a monthly basis,
Oh, wow.
and we just update him and get ideas. Do we want to raise money? Do we not? What are we thinking? And he's been a really valuable contact. But it's really as we need them, and I think that's the best investor is someone who's there for you, but they're not trying to control what you do next. They're not. I know this is very typical of investors, but for me, it would be very frustrating to have to send over financial reporting every single month. I mean, that is a major drain on your time as a founder, especially when you're small and you're scrappy. Every minute counts. And so the fact that we're not in the position where we have to do that, I think is really valuable right now.
You talked about how you and Sarah Beth came together, but your team is distributed.
Yeah.
Like, what advice would you have on hiring and then managing a distributed team?
Sure. Well, I mean, on hiring, I think hire people who are really passionate. Another example of that in our team is our CMO, Lauren. Lauren is someone, she was one of the first people, she was actually our first hire. And she's someone who we had originally contracted with, again, through Upwork. So that's another tip is like, if you can't afford full-time employees, go to Upwork and just contract with people because actually I think most of our employees were contractors turned full-time. And Lauren, reached out and she said, I have personal experience with a prenup. She got married to an older man, had a really awful for her prenup. And because she had real world experience with it, she was really passionate about the mission. And we just knew right away, like, Lauren is an ideal partner for this company because she gets it. And so she's really been able to dig into voice of customer because of her experience. And so I think she's just a really good example of hire people who are just as passionate as you, especially, I mean, then you can say, well, Julia, you can't do that forever. Of course not. But for your first 5 or 6 hires,
Yep.
it's critical, because if people are just there for, especially, in startup land, for the glam, to say that they work for the startup, they're probably not going to stay very long. And that's no value to you as a company. So, and then I think in terms of managing a remote team, I think we do a really amazing job of managing, because we have structures in place for weekly team meetings where we all get together and we share something personal, and then we go into team updates. We have meetings almost every single day, like short little half-hour meetings where we get updated on different segments of the business. And then we have weekly one-on-ones. So if with my direct reports, I meet with them every single week and just talk about, hey, how's it going, how's workload. And having those structures in place, it's something that initially I thought, this is a time suck. And now I really see the value, because as you start to scale, as you start to add more and more employees, it becomes more important to stay aligned on the mission, and aligned on the growth of the different segments of the business.
Yeah, a key takeaway of what you said, and I've done the same thing, so I want to double down on it. If you're a small company and the early stage employees, if you are able to contract with them at first, it's a benefit for both sides, because you get to see their work, they get to see what the company's like, and if you're a small company, it's not a fit for everybody. So you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that it's a good working relationship.
Yeah.
And it's worked out for me every time.
Yeah, and I think the other point is, like, do you like them as people? This is something nobody talks about, but I think given that you spend so much time, even though my team's remote, right? We spend so much time together. Do you like them? Do you understand each other's communication styles? And if not, are you able to get to a point where you're able to effectively communicate? And that is super important in a remote team, and especially a high growth company. Transparency among teams is key. So yeah, you have to, and I think you should enjoy your work. So it really helps when you like working with the people in your company.
So, we have a lot of students here, and they're busy with school.
Yeah.
Yet you were busy with work while you were doing HelloPrenup on the side. Was that like a year you were doing it on as a side before you went all in full time? Is that
Maybe a little more than that.
right? So it was a long
Yeah, in
time.
terms of development, and then
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I worked a full-time job through Shark Tank.
right.
I didn't go full-time until after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another lesson learned of, if you can turn what they call a side hustle, but a side
Yeah.
business into someone full time. I did the same thing with VentureFizz. I had a recruiting firm, and I saw this market need where no one knew what was going on in the Boston tech scene. So I just aggregated all the information together, launched it, people started following it, and then 6 years later, I went full time on it. But it
Yeah.
wasn't like 2 months later I went full time on it.
Yeah.
I eventually got a revenue model, figured out how to get repeat, revenue and recurring revenue. But same idea, where
Yeah.
if you can do it as a side to morph into full time, it is a smart way to approach it.
Yeah, and I think that's grit too, right? It takes a lot of grit to be able to do that on the side.
Right.
It's not easy.
Right.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
True.
And I think it also gives you the opportunity to test things out and think through your ideas, and you just have to be consistent.
Right, like writing that 1,200 page article every day over and over, and thinking of topics and what am I going to write about today, and going that
Yeah.
level of detail about that minor piece of the SEO search,
We now have a full-time content writer, though, so that saved me. And by the way, she was originally a contractor that I had hired back in the day when it was just me, to help me write those 1,200 word term papers. I call them every day. And now she's a full-time employee, and one of our star employees. I mean, she's incredible. So
you were writing, and then obviously you've morphed. So how do you spend your time now? Like time management, like how do you juggle your time, and what percentage of your time is spent doing what?
yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's all everything at once all the time. So there's a lot of management that goes in, figuring out management structures and strategy of the company, looking ahead, what does the next 6 months look like? Looking at the data. What is data telling us? Comparing that strategy to the data. And then, I'm still in the legal aspects of the business, thinking about based on data, feedback from our customers, what they want, what do we need to build next. I'm very involved equally in the tech, and what are we building to meet those needs, those customer needs. So I don't, every week is different, but that's part of startup life. It's just you go with it, and things are constantly changing, and there is no routine. The routine is there's no routine.
So what's the hardest parts of building a company, that lessons learned since starting?
Unpredictability. There's always a sense that like tomorrow might be your last day. Especially in the world of online search, you're always a little bit nervous,
If they change the algorithm or
change the algorithm. There was just a big algorithm change that hit a lot of companies. Also AI. AI is going to change what top of the funnel looks like. How do we integrate AI in a way that's responsible, especially in law, and where, we know AI has failed a couple of times very publicly in the courtroom, and we don't want to be the next victim. And making sure that, we're paying attention to what our consumers need, which is always changing. So again, unpredictability is like the number one most predictable thing, is every day something is changing, and it's very hard for some people. There are people in the world who I truly believe you're either a founder or you're not, and it's okay if you're not, but you need to figure that out quickly, because otherwise, you'll run yourself ragged. I also think that you need to be, as a founder, if you are that founding personality, you need to fail often and fail hard, take big swings, and don't worry if that's not the right decision. If you made that decision based on the information you had at the time, and that is truly your best decision, then you'll never be sorry, because you'll learn something from it. So I believe very strongly in the triangulation of opinions among teams, and a kind of idea meritocracy.
Well, we need more female founders. I have two daughters, and perhaps they choose an entrepreneurial path. So what advice would you have, for women in entrepreneurship?
Go boldly. You know, just push forward as hard as you can. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. I think taking risks is key as an entrepreneur, and meet as many people as you can. One thing that I see men are so inherently good at is networking. It's almost like, they've just been conditioned to network, to make friends, and worry about the business later. That's something I really struggled with initially, is I had no idea how to network. I was like, you're either in the friend group or it's professional. And I think over time I've learned the power of networking. You can care deeply about and learning from someone else, and you can find mentors, and you can make friends, but they can also be very valuable contacts in business. And that is networking at its core. So I would encourage women to network as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, I had another experience today with a Suffolk student, and he was asking me, a question about, networking and, sales, and I was like, you know what, I've always heard about this book, but I never read it. but it was How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's a book that was probably published in the 60s. And I'm like, you should read this book. He's like, oh my God, I have it in my backpack. And he pulled it out, and I was just like, oh my God. And I took a picture of him because I was just like blown away that, he had this book in his backpack.
That's awesome.
It's so awesome. So this is a book that I highly recommend. I do audiobooks, so I'm only like, a third of the way through it. But what you were talking about with networking, it is all about relationship building and being genuinely interested in other people is the whole synopsis of where I've gotten so far in this book, where I'm like, oh my God, I've built my career on this. It's, networking, building relationships, and ultimately that leading them to introduce you to somebody that ends up doing this and becomes a customer, and all these different crazy things. That the world is all uber connected. So the more you can connect the dots, the better you'll be, whether if you're building a company or starting your career. I'm very passionate about people being back in the office because I think the pandemic, if you graduated right when the pandemic happened and you were just working from home, I feel bad that those people are missing the opportunity to learn from other people and get networked professionally. So, I don't know if people need to be in the office 5 days a week, but to hopefully build a network is definitely key. So, all right, anybody have any questions? Anybody? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think failure in a professional environment is ever negative. And in fact, one of the things that I think is really important in the culture of my company is that failure is actually encouraged, right? Because it means that you put out an idea and you tried it. So if it doesn't work, that's great. You tried it. I would rather that than the alternative. And so I would say don't be afraid of failure and be really humble about what you have to learn. One of the things, if I could go back to my younger self, is I would tell her to stop trying to pretend like she knew the answer all the time. Because I could have learned so much more from people, professionals that I was working with or people I networked with along the way, if I just asked more questions and maybe shut up sometimes. So that's my best advice is just, fail big, don't be sorry. And yeah, just ask a lot of questions and always be learning. You can never go wrong.
Yeah, you're not like in the professional world. If you don't try, that's a failure. But trying and not succeeding is not deemed as, oh, the first guest we had today, Don, he's a 5-time CEO. He talked about his first 2 CEO jobs, total bust. Like to the fact that the VC community was like, oh, Don Bulens, ooh, but there was one VC that still believed him and ended up going to Equal Logic.
Yeah.
And that was the company that exited for 1.4 billion. So
Yeah.
you got to learn as long as you're learning and putting yourself out there. But yeah, don't be afraid of failing and having that be something that works against you professionally, because you're going to learn a lot from it.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot from other founders that have failed in their startups, and they have a whole pile of money that they raised sitting in the bank, and they go back to the original investors and are like, "Here's your money back." How humbling is that? And the investors say, "Keep it. You're going to start something else." And when the first time I heard that, this happened to a friend of mine, I was like, "Wow, that makes so much sense," because the investor is believing in you as a person, and they're proud of you for putting yourself out there, pushing forward with the idea, even if it doesn't work.
there's so many companies out there that start off with a totally different idea that end up being Slack, Twitter. It's all, part of the process.
Yeah.
Well, Julia, thanks so much for
Thank
taking the
you.
time to share your experience of building a
Yeah.
company and obviously all the great work your team continues to do and, for sharing all the great advice with the Suffolk community here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.